Howdy folks, Jeff Sengstack here. I want to talk about working with separate dimensions in a 2D plane. Now in my Infinite Skills course on After Effects, I talk about separate dimensions in a three-dimensional plane when I talk about maneuvering a camera through 3D space. It really is an effective way to move a camera where you have separate x, y, and z values. But I don't talk about working with just the x, y values, a 2D plane, and I want to talk about that here. So why use separate dimensions? Well, separate dimensions are helpful when you have motion where the x and the y values will be perpendicular to each other. For instance, if you have a ball bouncing across the floor, the x value, the left to right value, right to left, the horizontal value, is going one kind of smooth way, whereas the bouncing ball, the y value, is distinctly different in terms of how it behaves than the left to right motion or the right to left motion. So when you have that kind of circumstance, you want to separate out the x and the y values so you can manipulate them separately. Let me show you why not separating them doesn't work. Sorry about that double negative, but I think you'll see what I'm talking about. We're going to work with position the normal way that you would work with position. Got the soccer ball selected here. You can have any kind of an object here working inside any kind of a comp. I just have this little soccer ball here to make it look like a real bouncing ball, right? I click on the soccer ball to make it active. I press P to open up its position property. I want to position it up here in the upper left-hand corner to start off with, like right there, for example. So I turn on keyframes for that by clicking on the toggle animation stopwatch. The keyframes are now ready to go there. Let's go forward in time, let's say about a second or so, and pull it down to the floor here like that. And go forward another second or so and pull it up like so. Can't be quite as high as the original launching point. Bring it down to the floor again like so. I think you can see how this is working. Each bounce a little bit shorter than the other. And that, I think, will be enough for our purposes here to see that this doesn't work very well. Okay, now I'm going to play this by going back to the beginning, and I'll turn off that path by just clicking away from it, and this will watch that. It goes down, and it kind of scrapes and kind of flips around and scrapes, and the motion along the curve is a constant speed, which is not what you want. You want it to start slow and then accelerate at the bottom. You don't want it to kind of go swooping to the left and to the right like this. You want it to kind of come in like this and then drop straight down, bounce straight up, and then arc over like that. So the motion doesn't work. Well, we can fix the motion by breaking the Bezier curve handles, but we're not going to be able to fix the acceleration. Let's just see how we break the handles, though. I'll show you that. So I'll click on this one keyframe there. That's the bottom. I want to break its handles there. There are the handles. Whenever you have a keyframe selected there, you've got the Bezier curve handles there showing up on that keyframe. Then you've got one handle on this adjacent keyframe to the right, and another one on the one to the left. So you've got four handles showing up here. And I want to break these handles so I can adjust the shape of the curve. I'm showing you this now because we're going to break the handles like this again, but we're going to do them inside the graph editor, not here inside the comp panel, because you can't break the handles inside the comp panel when you're working with separate dimensions. But I'll show you how to do it here. To do this, I just click on the Alt or the Option key, and then click on the handle, and then drag it, and that breaks it. Now I can let go of the mouse button, let go of the Alt button, and now we can move this guy around independently like that. And you see how we're beginning to make the curve look more realistic here. I can do it on the outgoing side too here, so it bounces more or less straight up instead of to the right like that. And now that shape is more or less realistic. We can go up to this guy here and adjust it a little bit too, like so. And now I'm going to leave this guy alone. That Bezier curve is fine because we do want it to kind of go over at a nice arc like that, not in a sharp angle. I'm going to break this handle now too. I'm not going to break all of them, but I'll just show you how to do a couple here. So I'll click on that to make it active. There are its handles. They are working together, which is not what you want. You want to break them. Hold on the Alt or the Option key, click, drag, let go of the mouse, let go of the Alt. Now we can work on them independently. There you go. Now we've made the shape of the curve right, but take a look at these little dots here. Each dot is a frame, and so if they're spaced uniformly like that, that means there's no acceleration here, no deceleration. It's constant speed, which doesn't make any sense at all for a ball that's falling or bouncing. So we can't really change that because the x and the y values are connected here. We want to have the y value separate so we can adjust the speed of the y value and not change the speed of the x value. Can't do that when you got them connected like this. Let's just take a look at how this plays out now. The shape of the curve is fine, but the acceleration will not be. It goes boink, and it's all the same darn speed, which is not what we want. So we overcome this by using separate dimensions. So I'm going to get this guy back to the beginning. Don't have to, but I'm getting it back there. Clicking on the word position to select all these keyframes and deleting all of them. We're pressing the delete key or the backspace key. And now I want to work with separate dimensions. I want to have separate x and y values. And there are several ways to do that. The standard, easiest way to do that is to simply right-click on position or any other thing where you're going to split the values up. Right-click and say separate dimensions. Or if it's a verb, separate the dimensions. So now we separate them. Notice they're both still selected because this guy's active. When this guy's active, it still assumes that you're going to move both of them at the same time. We don't want to do that. We are able to move them separately by using the graph editor. We'll get there in a second. We can also move them separately if you click away here and just manipulate them numerically like this, which is a good way to do it. But I want to use the graph editor, and I'll show you the other way that you can separate dimensions along the way here. If you want to separate the dimensions without using the right-click method, you just have them selected here and go up to Animation, and then Separate Dimensions down there. You see the check mark says they're already separated. Or you open up the graph editor, which we need to do anyways, and in the graph editor there's a little button right there that separates the dimensions, but since they're already separated, it's grayed out. So we're ready to go here. So what I want to do is keyframe the X position first, and then we'll keyframe the Y position separately. So I'm going to turn on keyframes for the X position here at the beginning, toggle that animation switch, and now it's ready to go. Notice you get a red line there. Red designates the X and green is Y. This green right there is not the Y value. Actually, the Y value is right underneath the X value. So I've keyframed the starting point for the X. I want to go to the end of the comp now like that. And I want the X value to be over here. I want to move this guy from left to right. So I can just drag it over, which would change the Y values too, but that's not so critical. Or I can use the numbers to do it, and I kind of like using the numbers to do it. So I hover my cursor over the number, see that it turns into that little scrubby tool with a little finger pointing up, two arrows going up both sides like that. That's a scrubby tool. Click and drag, and that can move it over like that. So now we've gone left to right. And you see that we now have this graph here. Now if you don't see a graph that's angled like that, if you see a flat one, it's because you have a different view in your graph editor. Go down here and click this little button right there to choose the graph type. It might be auto select, or it might be speed. We want a value. We want to see the actual X value. So that's the right thing to check there. If you look at it, the X value, I click on it again, it starts out a little bit less than 0. That's because the X value is off the left-hand side. And it goes off to a number bigger than 800 because it goes off to the right side. This whole thing is 800 by 600, so the whole thing is 800 wide. So the left-hand side is 0 and the right-hand side is 800. That's why it goes from a little bit less than 0, a little bit more than 800. You can see that it says 500 pixels there. The graph automatically adjusts its size here depending on the values for your X and Y. And that happens because this little guy down here is selected. It auto zooms the graph height, which is what you want to happen here. Alright, now I want to do the Y position, so I want to get this guy back to the beginning. I can press the home key or just drag it over like that. I want to set keyframes for Y. So I'll go down here and select Y, make it active. And I want it to start up there. So I click that. And now I want to go in a little bit. Notice the green shows up now. I want to go in a little bit. Let's say in about, a second or so. And I want it to be down on the floor. So I'm just going to take my Y position here and drag it to the right to bring it down. And now bring it right down to the floor like that. Now here comes the sort of counterintuitive part. I'm not going to put in keyframes for its height. That's where people get thrown off. You don't want keyframes up here. You control the height using the Bezier curves. So don't worry about putting keyframes up here. We're just going to mark the place where it bounces on the floor. So go forward another, maybe a second and a half now. So that it bounces right about there or so. And they just put in a keyframe there, the exact same keyframe you had before. So just click on this little diamond to say, put a keyframe here that matches the one ahead of it. Let's go in another one, say less than a second and a half, maybe right around there, because each bounce will be a little bit closer together. Click there. So you're putting in the places where it hits the floor, essentially. And you're going to worry about the height of the arc later. There we go. Do this a couple more times. At some point the ball will just kind of roll, right? So I think we'll just have it start rolling right on there and we'll call it a day. Don't want to put in too many keyframes here, so we'll just pull it off like that and have the last keyframe marked there. Notice as we mark those keyframes they show up here. And what I want to do now is I want to adjust the Bezier handles for these guys. Let me just go back a little bit so you can see the ball. Now before, we adjusted the Bezier handles here inside the comp panel. So this particular one is right there. That's this guy there. I click on it and lo and behold there aren't any Bezier handles. Well, your first thought may be, okay, well that's because it's a linear keyframe. It comes straight in and goes straight out. So it's a linear keyframe, so I need to change it to Bezier, right? So I right click on it the way I would normally do it, and I go to keyframe interpolation, and I go up here and I change it from linear to Bezier. Okay, and great, it now is Bezier, but there aren't any handles here still. That's because handles here would affect both the X and the Y values. Handles down here affect only Y here and only X on the red line. So you want to work with the Y values here. So what I want to do is have all these keyframes be Bezier keyframes. To do that, I just click on the Y position over here to select them all. You see they're all selected, they're all yellow. I right click on any one of them now, just this guy here for example. Keyframe interpolation, change it to Bezier. Click OK, and now all of them are Bezier. See the all of handles now. No handles here, but handles down here. And I want to break this handle here so that this guy can go up in the air and have a nice arc to it. It works a little bit differently to break a handle down here. Sometimes when you hover over the end here, press the Alt or the Option key, and click, nothing happens. It stays stuck together. Not sure why that is, but click again, and it breaks the second time. So there you go. Now that they're broken, are all broken, which is good. But I'm going to click away, so I deselect them all and work only on this one here. Now let's just mess with this a bit. This is the handle with the line coming into the curve. It's the left-hand side of that keyframe. Right there is the keyframe. This is the part that comes in. So I'm going to adjust that over here. Adjust the shape of this. Now notice as I pull it this way, the little frames here, the little dots get spread out at the bottom, which means it's going to go faster as it goes down here, which is good. We want that. We want it to go fast. It goes, they're close together here, so it goes slow, and then it goes faster like that. Okay, I'm going to take this one coming out, do the same thing, and pull it up like that. Now I can go left or right to kind of adjust how fast it comes out. But there you go. And as I pull down, you notice that the graph adjusts down below there. It'll always compensate for the change in height like that. Notice I'm pulling down to make it go up. Seems kind of counterintuitive, right? But there you go. And that works well. Let's go to the next one by clicking on it. If I take its handle coming in, it's probably pretty well already adjusted, but the one coming out is what I need to work on. So left and right, pull it up so it's not quite as high, that one. Click on this one, click on the right one mainly. You can adjust both, but I think you get the picture of how this works now. And I'll do a couple more here, what the heck. While we're at it. And on our way. Keep on pulling the one that's to the right, the one that's going out of the keyframe. Each one pulling to the right a little bit. Just a little bit like that. Click on U. Bring you way down now. And a little fly off the screen. That last thing will look a little unrealistic, but that's okay. Too many keyframes. So let's see how this thing plays now. I'm going to take it back to the beginning. Turn off this path by clicking away, and let's watch it. And boom. Much more realistic. Yeah. Okay, it's not perfect, but I think you get a sense of how to get it set up anyways. I mean, you would adjust these guys a little bit more to make it look more realistic, but I think you see how it works. Let's add a couple other elements to it to make it a little more interesting. I want it to rotate. So I'll go back to the beginning here. I'll just show you a couple things. I'm going to add rotation to this group here by holding on the Shift key and pressing R, so we see rotation along with the X and Y still. Keyframe at the beginning there. Probably should rotate a little bit as it comes in. So I'm going to navigate to this first Y keyframe by clicking on this little triangle there to navigate to it. There it is down there. We'll rotate it a little bit. So by the time it gets from the beginning to that point, let's say it's rotated like a quarter of the way around. It's 90 degrees. Okay, now we go to the next keyframe down here by navigating to the next Y keyframe like that. We want it to rotate maybe more. Here's 90 degrees in that little arc, so up and down should be at least 180, but since it hits the ground there and starts spinning, it's probably going to be more than 180, so let's make it 270 from this point to that point. So 270 plus 90 is 360. So I click on this guy and just turn that off like that, and click on the first one and have this keyframe by one rotation like that. There we go. So now it should come down, and then it should accelerate the rotation a little bit as it goes to the next guy. Click on U, and we'll navigate to the next Y, which is right about there, right? I can navigate to it by clicking this little triangle. And now it rotated 3/4 from there to there. Let's have it rotate a whole rotation now. So make it go 2x now. So it goes from 1x to 2x. And we can see how this works. We go to the next keyframe. And each keyframe as we go along here, we'll have it rotate a little bit faster as it goes along. So this one will be, let's say, 3x plus 90 degrees or something like that. I mean, I don't want to get too detailed here. I just want to show you how to do this. So let's go back to the beginning and just kind of see how that works. Comes in, rotates a little bit, rotates more, rotates a little bit more. Every time it bounces, it picks up a little bit more rotation. All right. One more thing to do is to give it some motion blur, which is really simple to do that. Just switch on the motion blur switch there, turn it on, and to actually see it, you click on this guy to view it. Let's go back to the beginning here, and I'll RAM preview this guy, and then I'll show you that. So here's a RAM preview, and when it's done, it'll play, and you'll see the motion blur there as it comes in. All right. Kind of lands gently, but that's just how we set up those keyframes. We can make it land harder depending on how you adjust those Bezier curve handles. Finally, wouldn't it be cool if it could get kind of squished when it gets to the bottom instead of remaining in that solid looking thing there? It looks like a bowling ball instead of a rubber ball. I want to squish it. And to squish it, I need to squish it so it doesn't squish in the center, because that's where the anchor point is. I need to squish it so it squishes on the bottom. And there are a few ways to go about doing this, but the easiest way to go about doing this is to put this thing inside another comp, to nest it in a comp. So I'm going to make another comp here by clicking over here. I'll call this one final, and I'll take the separate dimensions and put that inside there. And now it'll play normally, as you'd expect. But we have the anchor point right there smack dab in the middle of this composition, which is where it should be, because we have this whole comp laid inside this comp here. I want to take that anchor point and put it on the bottom. So when we squish this guy and we change the scale just along the Y value, it'll actually squish on the bottom. So I take the anchor point and drag it down there by using the pan behind tool, which is this guy right there. Y is the shortcut, so if I just press the Y key down, it turns the pan behind. I can drag it down to the bottom. It doesn't make any difference where I put it, left or right, just as long as it's on the bottom. Now the anchor point's at the bottom. Let go of the Y key and we're back to the selection tool. Now I'm going to go to the point where it hits the bottom, right there. Use my page up, page down to get there. It's right in the spot there. I want to turn on keyframes for scale there. So I press the S key, I click on the scale there, and I need to separate out the scale values here. So I just work on the Y value for scale, kind of bring it down. That's the Y value. So I drop it down like that, and you see that it's squishing on the anchor point, which is what you want to have happen, right? So that first one's kind of a major squish. Now before it hits that keyframe, I want it to be regular, so I page up one notch forward. I set this guy back to 100%. I need to go past that keyframe, so I click away there, page down once, to that keyframe, up again. Now we set it to 100% again. So it'll kind of spring out on itself. Let's see how that looks. You'll see it kind of comes down, it goes slish. So it looks like that. It's pretty fast, but that would be a normal thing. What you can do now is you can copy and paste these keyframes. So I'll just marquee select them, Control or Command C to copy them. Go to the next place where it hits the ground. Use my page up, page down. That's the spot right there. And I want to go one frame before to then paste in those keyframes. So Control or Command V to paste them in. And I could do that a couple more times. I'll spare you all the details, but right there would be the next spot, I think. Right there it is. Go back one frame, Control or Command V. We see that the ball is dropping kind of slowly. We could adjust that later, but that's the way that works. And then probably the center keyframe should be a little less extreme when you get to that next bounce. So I'm going to navigate to that keyframe there. Instead of being 60, I should probably make that maybe 70, and I'll navigate to the next one so it's not quite as extreme because the ball is not bouncing that high anymore. Make it like 75 or something like that. Now let's just take a look at that guy. Drink, and see that it gets squished a little bit. Not so squishy when the bounce isn't so high. So there you go. That's how you use separate dimensions in a 2D space. And you do this when you've got some obvious perpendicular motion, when the X motion is going one way and the Y motion is going distinctly in the other direction, where it's really separated out like that. Then use separate dimensions to take care of that.